Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of Bible Calendar Basics. In the last video, 7,000 Years for the World, I said at the end that we would cover how the life of Christ is relevant to the 7,000 years for the world and the calendar. So let's turn to Scripture, and we'll be reading from Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. Alright. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed, and it shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. So here we have the very first prophecy of Christ coming to vanquish Satan and destroy evil and bring an end to sin and death. So we know what's going to happen. Now, how about when? So when we turn here to the book of Exodus, chapter 25, and we read starting from verse 10, and they shall make an ark of shittim wood, 2 cubits and a half shall be the length thereof, and a cubit and a half the breadth thereof, and a cubit and a half the height thereof. Okay, so breadth is just an old way of saying width. So length times width times height. Alright, we're learning about area here. So we have 2.5 cubits by 1.5 cubits by 1.5 cubits. Okay, so the sum of these comes out to 5.5 cubits. Now, of course, in more modern translations, they'll give the actual feet and the inches, so you won't actually see this in more modern translations, but if you read from the King James and older translations that are not King James, you'll always see cubits, and you'll always read the ancient measurements. Now, the significance of the 5.5 cubits is equal to 5,500 years. And in the last video, 7,000 years for the world, we already covered that one great day is equal to 1,000 years. So naturally, half a great day is equal to 500 years. Okay, so how do the great day and the cubits relate to one another? First, let's go over the Ark of the Covenant. Here we have the Ark. Poles are to go in between. Then you have the cherubs with their wings. Then here you have the mercy seat. Okay, so here in the mercy seat, we have mercy being given and established for the people who uphold the Ark of the Covenant. Those who uphold this Ark of the Covenant from God will be covered with grace and be shown mercy. Now, this is actually the second mentioning of an ark. So this is the second ark. The first one was mentioned in the story of Noah. Now, in the first ark, those who obeyed God in building the ark and loading the animals on it 2 by 2, okay, a male and a female, 7 pairs of clean animals, male and female, and 1 pair of unclean animals, male and female. And they were able to enter into the ark and be saved from the flood which drowned all of those who didn't believe in God. Now here, in the second ark, those who upheld the Ark of the Covenant would be shown mercy and grace, and they would not be judged by the law. Okay, they would not be condemned, they would not be destroyed. Alright, but instead they would live. So we can see that just connecting the different ideas surrounding these 2 arks indicates that this is indeed something great, and it's pointing towards something in the future. Now, we already went over that Christ would come to vanquish sin and death. Okay, that was represented in the prophecy given to Adam and Eve, where the head of the serpent would be crushed. Alright? Sorry for the little kitty illustrations here, but I believe you guys get the point, right? And then here, the evil of the world, or just evil, is washed out by the waters. The earth is cleansed. Those who obey God are saved. Here, that same message is repeated again. And the one to be sitting in the Ark of the Covenant then is the Son of God, or Christ, or Yeshua. Okay, now how do we prove this? Well, we turn to Daniel chapter 9. Okay, and I won't read all of this, but when we read from Daniel chapter 9 and verse 24 all the way to the closing, we see that the angel Gabriel is discussing a period of 70 weeks with Daniel. Now, why does this 70 weeks get brought up? Well, Daniel, okay, back in chapter 9, verse 2, he's reading over the prophecy of Jeremiah and realizes, like, oh, we're going to be in captivity for 70 years, and 70 years have almost passed. And the angel Gabriel comes after Daniel has prayed and asked, like, for understanding, because Daniel's all like, oh, like, there's something like bigger here going on, but I don't understand. So God sends the angel Gabriel and tells Daniel, not only will his people be released after 70 years, But the 70 years also represents 70 weeks. Okay? It also represents something bigger here. So you have 70 weeks, and then then there's a mention of 69 weeks, and then a final week. Okay, which all add up to the 70 weeks here. Now what happens in the after 69 weeks, okay, the Messiah is cut off, and the sacrifices cease. And then the abomination of desolation occurs. Now, many are really quick to jump and say, like, oh, this is talking about Christ being crucified and dying on the cross for our sins. And that's close, but then they also ignore the significance of the saying that the sacrifices will cease. So this is talking about a very future time here. Okay? So it says in verse 27, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. In the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease for the overspreading of abominations. He shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. So what's going on here is that there's going to be a future time where the sacrifice will be reinstituted, and then it's going to actually cease. Okay, it's going to be stopped. Okay, it's not going to be stopped because it wasn't stopped because the temple was destroyed. Okay, there's a very specific person here who will cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. As we read here in verse 27, it says, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And the reason why he does that is for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate. Now, those of you who are familiar with the books of Maccabees, that phrase, the abomination of desolation, comes up, but that is not the period in which this prophecy is concerned about. Okay, because the Maccabees, while the sacrifices and oblations were ceased and pagan rituals were committed in the temple of God at that time, and also a statue of Zeus was built on the altar and swine was sacrificed on the altar. This is not the period being discussed. How do we know this? Let's turn to the New Testament and read the words of Christ. Okay, so in Matthew chapter 24, verse 15, Christ says, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Okay, so right there Christ is confirming for us that this indeed is true. It wasn't regarding the Maccabean period, and this is not talking about the what many like to cite, the 70 AD where the temple was destroyed. No, that is not it either. Okay? Temple was destroyed, but there were no abominations put over it. Okay? That the temple just simply being destroyed and then there being no abominations of desolation being put over the temple does not satisfy the prophecy given in Daniel 9 verse 11. Now, going back to that prophecy, okay, so these weeks are representative of weeks of years, okay, and we know this to be true, okay, because when where is it? Actually it's in the book of Daniel as well. Okay, so when we go to Daniel chapter 4, okay, and read verse 32, and they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and 7 times shall pass over thee, until thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. And we see that after 7 years, okay, that King Nebuchadnezzar returned to his senses, and that he became a man again, and he wasn't eating in the wild. And further evidence of this 7-year period, we can actually read in the book of Genesis. Get something more specific here. Okay, so oops. All right, Genesis chapter 29, verse 26. And Laban said, It must not be so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill her week, and we will give thee this also for the service which thou shalt serve with me yet 7 other years. So here we see that from ancient times, even during the time of Jacob, that there was an understanding that there was a week of years, okay, meaning that 1 week equals 7 days, okay, this is just for the common year. And then there was also an understanding that this 1 week also was representative of 7 years, okay, a week of years. Now, while that phrase, week of years, is not explicitly mentioned here in Genesis chapter 29, verses 26 to 27, we see from the words of Laban, he tells Jacob to fulfill the week of who? Of Rachel. Because back here in verse 18, it says that Jacob loved Rachel and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel, thy younger daughter. Alright, so there was already that understanding that a week of years meant 7 years. Each day of the week representing 1 year. So that is how we know that the regular week, a regular period of 7 days is not being talked about here. However, we will cover the significance of this. Alright, so now here we have 70 weeks. So 70 weeks times 7 days equals 490 days. Okay? Now when we include the weeks of year, when we convert this to weeks of years, we have 70 weeks times 7 years, which is equal to 490 years. So, what is significant about this number 490 is that it is 10 times 49. Why does that matter? Because 49 is representative of 1 Jubilee. Okay. So what ends up happening is this. In my previous video, alright, or in my previous video, in the book of Leviticus, it states that, okay, after 7 Sabbaths of years have passed, or 49 years, okay, 49 years equals Jubilee. And in the 50th year is also a Jubilee. So the formula is this. $49 plus 1 equals 50. Meaning what? So if we have 49 years times 10 Jubilees, that gives us 490 years plus 10 years. Which comes out to 500 years. Now, what is significant about this? Why is this so significant? Okay, here go our 7 days of the week. Okay, now remember, each one represents 1,000 years. Okay, 1,000, 2,000, 3, 4. We said that Christ would come in the year 5,500. He would come in between here. Okay, now because there are 6 days of work, for the world, $6,000 minus 500 years is equal to 5,500 years. Okay, that is why that number is significant. Alright. And when we go back to put the rest of the pieces together from the prophecy of Daniel, so here we have 69 weeks. Okay, let's do the math. So 69 times 7, 483. Okay, plus 7, 490. Alright, so that brings us to the 490 years, and then we already did with the Jubilee, plus the 10 is, 500. Okay, so this means when we do $49 years times 120, so these are years, times 120 jubilees, gives us 6,000 years. This number 120 is significant. Why? As again, the first mention of 120 years is in the story of Noah. Okay, chapter 6, verse 3. And the Yahweh said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. And remember, Christ said his second coming would be as it was in the days of Noah. Alright, so there you have it, folks. That is the prophecy concerning the coming of Christ. Alright, now in the next video we will go over and see if we can find out exactly when Christ is born according to God's calendar. This video simply covered the coming of Christ to die on the cross and his second coming. Alright, so stay tuned, guys. We'll be showing in more detail in the next video how to apply this calendar to the life of Christ, specifically his birth and his death. Alright, shalom.